Thank you so much for being here with us today, KP.
Hi, Andy. So glad to be here. It's my pleasure.
Yeah, I'm super excited to talk about this topic with you. So let's get started from a natural healing perspective, which I know is your expertise. What happens to our bodies as we get older?
You know, there are things that happen to every single person that we all have in common, and they happen to different degrees and different people at different times. But fundamentally, our body goes through changes in the last 1/3 of our life or so that are very predictable. And if people understand that those things are coming, they'll be able to prevent them and then treat them appropriately. So often in our culture, we think of the things that affect elders as just being sort of accidental things that fall on the sky. Some people get arthritis, some don't. Why is that? Well, nobody knows. But in fact, they're very predictable. And often these things are predictable going way back, even into your youth or your middle age. We can know what the risk factors are for you to have not a specific disease or a specific year that the symptom starts, but very generally how it's going to go for you so that you can adjust your lifestyle and herbal medicine and diet and things like that. So basically, everybody gets drier. Their tissues start to get less juicy. All the juices of our body that our body produces, digestive juices, lubrication in our joints, lubrication or oil in our skin, eyes, all of those things get drier. Now, that doesn't have to be pathological. It depends on the person. Everybody's going to be a little drier at 75 than they were at 45 or than they were at 25, but it doesn't have to be to the level of a disease or something like that, but just understanding that. So if you're a person who's already starting to have problems with dryness at 45, you have to start to investigate so that you don't get pathologically dry. We all know of elders, maybe in our family or friends, who are just constantly complaining about, my eyes are so dry, they're driving me crazy, or my mouth is dry, or whatever. Also, the body tends to get a little colder. And in natural medicine, when we say colder, really what we mean is hypometabolic. Our metabolic processes slow down. And that includes body temperature. That's a part of it. But it's not just body temperature. You may feel like you're not cold, but your body is becoming less metabolically efficient with each year. So heart rate slows down, circulation at the extremities slows down. The classic cold hands and feet. We all know of old Uncle George who wears 3 bathrobes and his house is still at 90 degrees, So people are feeling metabolically cold. All very predictable. It's for reasons that we know why they happen. Strangely enough, we often can't get a good answer from our medical doctors. And, we could talk a little bit more about that later. Constipation is something that people experience, and that largely is because of both of these factors. Metabolism slowing down so that your large intestine isn't getting the message from your brain to squeeze when it needs to, and it's dry, so the stool is not lubricated to come out properly in a nice slimy way. So it's another classic situation that, again, most people don't know is coming, but if they do, they feel like it's just part of aging and nothing they can do about it. And so they try palliative or symptomatic kinds of things to feel better, which often then just create, more kinds of problems. Insomnia is another one. Again, probably everybody is going to sleep a little lighter at 75 than they do at 45, but it need not be pathological. You should be able to still have enough deep sleep to be able to awaken feeling good, fall asleep at bedtime. Maybe you get up and go to the bathroom once during the night. That's not an issue, but overall, you have deep, comfortable sleep and awaken feeling refreshed. Anxiety is something that tends to increase as well as people age. All these things go together. The dry, cold, constipation, insomnia, and anxiety is all a package that tends to happen as people age past, let's say about 60, something like that. For any given person, it can start earlier or later, but they're very much associated, and one tends to cause another. Not a direct relationship, but the constipated person tends to have insomnia. The insomniac person tends to be dry. All these things come in some way as a package. So treating the underlying causes that generate these things will help people not be pathological in these things. The other thing that goes along with this package is chronic pain. This is really a problem. My clientele is skewing older and older as every year that goes by. And, as the baby boomers get more and more interested in natural medicine, they're all now experiencing some kind of very serious problem. They've had their first heart attack, they've had their first major surgery, something like that. And they don't want to engage in the medical system the way their parents' generation did. They feel entitled to feel good forever. Unfortunately, they tend to feel like they should feel good forever without taking any responsibility for actually doing the things that help us get there. But anyway, so they one of the main things that people complain about is just day-to-day pain. And again, it comes from the same underlying root causes of depletion, toxicity, and metabolic decline. And it's something that they especially feel like their medical doctors aren't listening to. There are medications for dryness and cold and constipation and insomnia, but pain is really a problem. We have this opioid crisis now. So of course, medical doctors aren't handing out opioids the way they used to. And I hear from clients every single day, they say, look, I'm 75 years old. I'm racked with pain every day. It makes life not worth living. And the medical doctor says, you're over 60. What do you expect? Happens to everybody. Tough luck, That's not the answer they want to hear. And that's not the reality of what we can do for them as well. So I'm going to talk today about a few things that are a little bit more broad spectrum that people, as they're entering their elder years, will help them age in a healthy way and avoid these kind of problems, or at least, again, not cause them to be misery for the rest of their life.
Mm-hmm. So you touched on a couple, right? Chronic pain specifically. What other chronic conditions do you see are most problematic for most people as they get older?
Well, bone issues, osteoarthritis for sure. We call that the osteoarthritis of aging. Whether that's normal or just typical with a lot of these things is kind of hard to answer because everybody around us is living the same way. So if we lived a different way, maybe we wouldn't think it's so typical, but we just think everybody is going to develop osteoarthritis automatically. There are actually people who don't. So if we looked at those people and said, they have good bone density or lack of bone pain, osteoporosis and osteoarthritis, into their advanced years, what did they do differently? And could we do all those things? Mm-hmm. Fatigue is certainly another big one. And again, that's kind of hard to figure out whether it's nature or nurture. Does everybody get tired as they age, or it's because everybody becomes sedentary and, lets their bad diet habits sneak in and, and like that. Everybody knows somebody who's running marathons at age 90. I mean, we know it's possible to do, but most people, as they get into sort of postmenopausal or retirement age, start feeling like it's not proper decorum for them to be doing these kinds of things. And if they want to be, a grandma who gives cookies to the kids, that kind of becomes their role. And then they get sedentary and develop these kinds of issues. Another one is insufficient digestion. And that goes along with that whole lack of juiciness we talked about. Mm-hmm. Your digestion is regulated by a bunch of juices that are secreted by your various organs. And so insufficient digestion means that you become undernourished. And so all of your cells can't get the nutrients that they need. Things like minerals for your bone density don't make it to your bones because they're not digested. But it also creates digestive symptoms. So along with the constipation we talked about is chronic gas. That's a really major factor of aging. And people kind of make jokes about, grandpa farting or whatever, but it's very much a part of that issue. And again, people don't have much in the way of resources that they really know about to handle that. It seems trivial, but chronic gas can just be miserable. They just, it never leaves. There's nothing to do with it. It's pushing on everything in the core of your guts. And, again, your medical doctor just kind of laughs at you. You're not about to have a heart attack and, count your blessings kind of idea. And the other big one would be cognition and memory. Right. And of course, the baby boomers are in fear that they're going to develop Alzheimer's. And I always just like to mention that the majority of people do not develop Alzheimer's. And so, the odds are with you that that's not going to happen. But it's just so much in the news and everybody has a family member and it's so debilitating. And people just put themselves, in that person's shoes and just think, life isn't worth living. So what can we do to help prevent those sorts of things from happening. And, we're talking about people doing puzzles and, things like that, which, while not such a bad idea, are pretty superficial. And from what I see, this is all about body chemistry, which is part lifestyle, part diet, part, herbal medicine. But we're making great progress in some of these things. And, if you like, we can talk a little bit more specifically about something like Alzheimer's later. But it's something that, baby boomers, as soon as they start forgetting their car keys, it's like, oh, is this how it starts? For
Right.
most people, of course, not. And we have some things now that are just dramatically effective for just almost immediately reversing those kinds of issues. I mean, baby boomers come back to me after a month and just say, I started taking that stuff, and the whole issue of, walking into the kitchen, forgetting why I was there, is just gone now. So we know that that's not your genetics. That's something that we've done to help you change that. All right. So we have a handful of things that are very common for people.
Yeah. So, okay, so let's talk about lifestyle choices we can make, diet, herbs, all those. I know that's all part of what you do. So how can we use those three things to help alleviate some of these, chronic issues or prevent them?
Yeah, the first thing is for people to understand that these things really work. One of the things that is a challenge for baby boomers is that most of them did not engage in these things while they were getting up to this age. They were around it. All my peers from college or whatever, I got into this whole field when I was a teenager. So I was already doing those things, and my peers saw it and saw other people like me doing some of the things like that. So they were familiar with it compared to their parents' generation, but they didn't engage in it. They still lived on pizza or whatever their deal was. So first we have to convince people that there is really something there and that these things will work. Most people still in America think of these things as uh, pleasant hobbies, or wouldn't it be nice if those things really work? But from by the time you come down with an actual nameable disease like osteoarthritis, you have to be treated medically. It's not true. Natural medicine, we've been regenerating natural medicine in the United States for 50 years. It was obliterated for about 70 years. And then, we had to start from scratch. And I was in that cadre of people who started that. And but now we're there 50 years later. We can treat these very serious concerns. We can reverse bone density. I see it every week. We can reverse memory loss. The first thing is just to choose wisely about how you're living. Many times people will say, well, if I can't reverse my bone density in a year, what's the point? It took, 50 years to decline. It's not going to, change in a day. It may take 50 months to, start to get back to the place where it's really going to be of benefit. So you have to have some patience, you have to actually be consistent with these things, and you have to take a very broad-based approach. One of the things we're seeing now is the miracle remedy on the internet. At the time we're recording this interview, it's celery juice. All of a sudden, celery juice is the savior of the world. Celery juice comes from European naturopathy, and even before that, Ayurveda. I've been using it for 50 years with people, but it's not the one and only savior of the world. So instead of bouncing from trend to trend to trend, it was kale or maybe cauliflower last year and kale the year before. And, we have to take a broad-based approach to these things. Make sure that you're using a diet, for example, that's moist to help moisturize that dryness we talked about, easy to digest, and then find solid fact-based remedies, often based on tradition from maybe even thousands of years of things that people have found to work well, some of the traditional systems, and study it a little bit as a layperson. We all missed out on that because our grandmothers didn't know any of this. So, study that, not get too wound up in fads, and then actually do those things. So eating steamed vegetables once a week isn't going to cut it. You have to be serious about these things and actually do them. And you'll be so pleased with the results that you'll never want to stop doing them. But it has to be, in the context of a well thought out program. Not a bad idea to see a practitioner of some kind to at least get started. But certainly you can take webinars and read books and things like that. And again, we could talk a little bit more later about where do you get good information about these things.
Mm-hmm. Got it. So what could you give us some examples actually of, like, when you say eat a moist diet, obviously to remedy the dryness that comes with age. So what are your suggestions there?
Things like oatmeal, things that are inherently moist when you consume them. Vegetables like asparagus, things that, just when you eat them, they've absorbed some water and they're in your mouth. The opposite would be dry toast, rice cakes, undercooked rice, uh, things like that.
Okay.
Things that apparently have the moisture from having cooked them or being moist just, to begin with. An apple, is a moist food. And if you stew the apple, it's even moister.
Got it. Okay. Awesome. So do you want to move on to herbs and herbal remedies and teaching people how they can get started on that, or are you still want to talk about diet?
I know, let's talk about herbs. That's really
Okay.
what I was going to talk
Okay.
about most of the time.
Excellent.
Yeah.
So yeah, tell us about that. So for the person watching right now who might know nothing about getting started with such a thing, could you share, where they might get started?
Very much so. So the first thing is to find authoritative information, and that's not going to come from the teenager at the health food store. So you might buy your products at the health food store, and they do have good products and not so good products, but the job of the people there is to sell you products, not to educate you, really, bottom line, about how to take care of yourself. So be cautious about that advice. Find people that have a solid reputation, listen to their webinars, read their books, things like that. And get started with something. Try one thing first, find out how that works. If it's worked, keeps doing it. So we can recommend a couple of herbal remedies that you might start trying that work for almost everybody. Most people begin to feel better as they're aging. The first one is an herb called guduchi, Guduchi, guduchi. It's an herb from Ayurveda.
Okay.
And it's an exceptional herb for aging because it just helps all these things we're talking about. It slows down aging. It's somewhat tissue rebuilding. It's somewhat detoxifying. Those are the qualities we want in something that people can take for decades. It's very well known. It's considered in Ayurveda to be the #1 herb to detoxify the tissues of the brain. So it helps with memory and cognition and like that. That'll be available in powder or capsules, and a typical dose is about 5 grams a day. So it takes a few weeks or months of taking that to really feel that difference. But it's very much a workhorse, multi-purpose herb that almost everybody who is aging can benefit from.
KP, what age do you recommend someone starts that?
50 would be a good age, somewhere in that
Got it.
neighborhood. Yeah. Most of these things could be taken earlier, and they have other properties that might benefit younger people, and it wouldn't hurt you to do it. But, you have to start thinking about what your second 50 years are going to be like, when you're around 50, and we get this, cold, dry, constipated thing starting to ramp up. It usually, that whole metabolic energy really starts to dominate about age 60. And so as people get older from about 60, they tend to just develop more and more of those issues. So you get started a little bit earlier, and it prevents some of that going in that direction.
Awesome.
Another combination, again from Ayurveda, is actually the most consumed herbal combination in the world, Triphala, Triphala. More people take this combination than any other herbal combination in the world. This is one that actually can be taken any time of life. It's the most universally applicable herb combination in the world. It does something for every tissue in the body: nervous system, endocrine system, digestion. You take a small dose every day, maybe a couple grams. Again, it will be pills or powder, and you could start that at whatever age you are now, and it will have long-term benefits. But one of the ingredients is one of the best antioxidants and anti-inflammatory herbs in the world, for example. And so that's something you just take every day for 80 years. And I've been doing this now long enough that I often run into people. I'm going back to some place to teach where I taught 30 years ago, and someone says, remember me? I was here when you talked about that before, and you mentioned Triphala, and I started taking 2 grams a day, and look at my skin now 30 years later. Really beneficial for a wide variety of things. All these things now, it's easy to find good information on the internet. You could certainly go to my website. You're going to find a lot of good information. But just in general, it's a question of finding authoritative people, and that's a little bit more challenging to know who's authoritative. But you figure that out, and you can get good information. Let's talk about a couple for women in particular. I expect that a lot of our audience, you that are watching this today, are women.
Mm-hmm.
So dongquai is a Chinese herb, Dongquai. It's called the queen of herbs, the herb that's the most significant for women. And in terms of total pounds of herbs, this is the most consumed herb in the world. More pounds of this are consumed than any other herb on planet Earth. 2 billion women are taking this herb every day. So it's a very general rejuvenative for women. It helps build blood, which is the main issue. And women have a tendency to have difficulty with their blood and sustaining healthy blood compared to men. Men have their own issues, but so again, a couple grams a day, and that could be taken in tea form or powder or capsules, couple a day. The Ayurvedic equivalent to that is an herb called shatavari. Shatavari is the root of a species of asparagus. It's closely related to the asparagus we eat as a vegetable. The name means 100 husbands, the idea being that, your sexuality is so matured that, you could be in that kind of a relationship. Just an amazing rejuvenative for women. And it's moisturizing. We talked about that issue.
Mm-hmm.
So again, that's something that works well in small doses starting around age 50. Some of these herbs we use for other things in higher doses, earlier, but that would be a good age around 50 to start taking a couple grams a day and just take that forever for women. Does so many things, but largely it's this moisturizing thing. So it supports all the female reproductive tissues. It helps with the menopausal transition. It treats a lot of menopausal symptoms. But if we started a little earlier, maybe that one 45 rather than 50, because women are having menopause a little earlier now, and often women are already perimenopausal by 50. So that is real helpful with that. It can start earlier, benefits kidneys and bladder, so many things. For men, the two equivalents would be ginseng in Chinese medicine, most well-known herb in the world. This one is pretty sexually stimulating, and so we normally don't give it to men until about age 35. But it would be fine to start taking it somewhere around age 50, take it 2 grams a day for 50 years. Chinese medicine says if you can feel the ginseng that you took today, you took too much. So we don't want to take the amount that's overly stimulating, somewhere in that 2-gram range, many, many different preparations from, tea to capsules. And, a lot of detail about these other things, but that would be something to target, and it helps men with reducing these aging symptoms like we're discussing, fatigue, sexual dysfunction, and it rebuilds tissue again. The other the equivalent in Ayurveda for men with that would be the word ashwagandha, which I think everybody has heard of by now. That's the herb of the year in the health food arena. And the ashwagandha is not limited to men. Women can take it, but it's particularly good for men. So again, very similar to the ginseng we talked about, enhances stamina, sexual functioning, memory. It's a great brain herb. It just checks all the boxes of things that we talked about. Again, it's one of these things that you start taking, you take it every day forever, a couple grams would be good. So those are some ones for people to look at to start investigating the possibility of taking these. You don't have to take all of them. Something like triphala, pretty much good for everybody, and then you could pick one of the rejuvenating herbs for your gender and take that. And the more you study and get involved, maybe you would end up taking other things, but that would be a good start for most people.
Awesome. Thank you. I love it. I appreciate you getting very specific in what people can start taking, dosage, gender specific and all of that. So that's awesome. Here's just like a generic question. What does healthy aging mean to you? Since that's, the topic of our conversation today, what does it mean to you?
Well, it means living longer, and it means living better. So most people would rather live better than live longer. And, I saw both my parents just in abject misery for the last 10 years of their life, both of them just praying every day to not wake up and have more of the same, even worse, every day. That's what we don't want. So retaining vitality, muscular strength, sexuality, keeping your marbles, not having any of these chronic, kinds of problems. In a way, it's measured by the things that we don't have because we feel like we felt before. Now, there are subtle changes. Nobody has shuffled off this mortal coil without dying, as far as we know, so far. So it's going to happen to everybody. But wouldn't you like to have 10 more years and have those be good quality years, not sitting in a convalescent home praying to die? That's what we don't want. And now we've found medical ways to keep people alive a lot longer, but they're not enjoying that.
Yeah.
So those things, being able to to walk comfortably, being able to eat comfortably, sleep comfortably, carry out your normal activities that you would without side effects, problems, and issues. One of the beautiful things about being in the field that I've been in, I became the student of my mentor when I was still a teenager, and I studied with him closely in a mentor type relationship for 32 years. And so I went with him different places and saw different things. And I got to see people who lived the way we're talking about. They ate a healthy diet their whole life. They exercised. They took these tonic, long-term, slow-acting herbs. And I just saw how possible it was, people who had good stamina and could still exercise and still had their brains working, well, well into their 90s. And I just said, hey, I want to be that, not, where I see my parents going. So that's the story.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I love that. I love that question, to hear everyone's answer to that question, because it's always different for everybody. So that was beautiful. So KP, could you share a little bit about your free gift? There's a button below this video, everyone, that you can click on to go get a free gift from KP. So what is it?
The free gift is a webinar called Combating the Early Signs of Aging. And it's very similar to the things we're talking about here today. We're going to be talking about diet, lifestyle, and herbal medicine, how to recognize when things are starting to, go off the track and down into the ditch. We want you to, if you're on a train heading for the bridge over the chasm, we don't want you to start thinking about these things when the train is already going straight forward down to the bottom. We want you to think about this and realize that there's a broken bridge up ahead, and fix that. So we'll talk, it's a 90-minute webinar, and we'll dig into a lot of very specific kinds of things like we talked about today, how to do it, where to get it. There are a plethora of handouts along with that webinar. So identifying the problems and then figuring out long-term ways of handling the root cause of these issues, including all these areas we just talked about.
Awesome. Thank you. I appreciate that. Are there any last insights? Anything else you want to leave people with before we wrap up?
Well, I just want to repeat what I said earlier about natural medicine being far more powerful than people think. And I think people, again, back to that, it's a convenient hobby. It's something maybe you do for minor things like cold or flu, or maybe you try it. It may not work. It just works really well, especially herbal medicine, much more powerful than you ever knew. Dynamic, dramatic, effective. These things really deliver, but you just got to try them, and you have to do it right. So the number one thing that most people are not doing right is dose. And so you have to find an authoritative way to figure out what the dose really is. I just see this failure so often that people say, oh, I already tried that. I took ashwagandha. How much did you take? Well, 500 milligrams. Well, just not enough to do anything. And we just have really somehow created a mythology in our culture about these doses. And it came from our drug-related mindset, where you take one Valium or you take one antibiotic at a time, and we just don't understand that. But you have to take sufficient dose for these things to work. So you have to figure that out. Don't believe the dose on the label. That's the dose that the manufacturer wants you to try, that they think won't freak you out, not the dose that's actually going to work. So you certainly could read any of my books. You go to my website, but other people who are associated with, let's say, professional associations, they have credentials from these professional associations. Look at their websites, their books, their material, and they will tell you the truth about these things, so you can actually get the results you want and have the benefits of all those things I just talked about.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you so much for doing this. I really appreciate you and your work and time and energy that you put into this today. So thanks so much for being here.
Yeah, sure. Always my pleasure.
Absolutely. And everyone who's watching and listening right now, thank you so much for showing up for yourself, and we will see you very soon.